the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Great ideas, everyone. Let's get them on the posters.
Okay, I'll write abolish here. I'm doing no ice.
Yeah, that's good.
Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So there was some ICE demonstrations by public schools, Lakota being one of them, the school in my neighborhood. But this was happening all over the country. It was organized. Everybody wants to say that it was a student-led movement, and let's just assume that's the case. How did the students come to know how to have this radical left-wing ideology? Did they learn it from their parents, or did they get it in the school? And I saw some of the aftermath from the Lakota thing, because the students felt, some of the ones that were at the demonstration, the anti-ICE demonstration, clearly the teachers were involved. They endorsed it. The kids were walking down the hall with these signs going to a protest that occurred during school hours. So who was punished? What kind of things happened to the students for leaving class? You know, those are the kinds of things you want to know. And the lack of that kind of thing tells you everything you need to know about it, is that you had really a radical unionized workforce that has indoctrinated the students into believing radical left-wing politics that they are not getting from home. They're not getting it from their parents. They're getting it from the public schools. And that's the danger of this whole thing. And then when everybody's upset about it, they don't get mad at the teachers. They get mad. They can only get mad at their children, which of course they won't, which is why these Democrat initiatives look to cascade their efforts off victim types, whether it be children, whether it be minority groups, everywhere you look and you see these color revolution kind of movements. You saw it with the brown shirts, with when fascism was taken over in Italy, and of course in Germany under Hitler. Everybody knows that Hitler was a socialist, and that has no connection to right-wing movements, Christian movements, those who believe in the Bill of Rights. Those are not fascists. Mussolini was a fascist, and he was a left-winger. Adolf Hitler was a socialist. The Nazis were socialists. The same kind of socialism you hear out of Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and the average teachers at Lakota. They have left-wing politics. When you say left-wing, it's left of a center, and Hitler and Mussolini and all these crazy lunatics who want to overthrow and defund ICE, defund the police. They're all on the same side together. And so those who are trying to overthrow American society, why would you want to sponsor a school that teaches kids to do that? So the evidence that it's happening is in the kids themselves, that they, if they were not provoked by the teachers, which I believe completely they were, the pamphlets that were put out for this walkout, what they call it, to protest ICE. Anybody really think that kids really care about politics at that age, or were they taught to care? And I'll say that adults have their fingerprints all over this thing. It's not that the kids did it on their own, but let's assume that they did. Where did they learn it from? And it goes back to what happens to kids when you drop them off from school, or they leave on the bus to go to school, and if they're in a state of confusion, they're growing up. Maybe their parents are a little too strict. Maybe they're being grounded by their parents for something that's going on at home, and they want to get back at the parents because they're mad, the authority figures in their life, and it doesn't take much. You hear it in these sex abuse cases where students fall in love with their teachers, and teachers are having relationships, sexual relationships with students way too much. It's happening all over the place. It happened at Lakota just recently. A teacher was prosecuted, sentenced he pled guilty to that very thing. So it's not like it's a remote issue that happens in some corner somewhere. It happens openly. We went through an incident at Lakota a few years ago where the superintendent was a highly sexualized person and didn't believe that those kinds of judgments should be made. So you have a student population that has all these really radical progressive people running it. All the administrators have this kind of left-wing ideology. Not all of them, but I'd say most of them. I don't think you can get a job as an administrator unless you have some left-leaning tendencies about you. And you that might be, some people might say that Mike Pence is a right-wing person. He was a centrist. That's why Trump put him on the ticket the first time around, to kind of win people over and show that he wasn't going to be radical right-winger when the rest of the world is dealing with various degrees of Marxism. So when you have people say that school boards are supposed to be nonpartisan, trustees are supposed to be nonpartisan, the schools are supposed to be politically free, the kids aren't supposed to get indoctrination from the outside world, yet you have teachers in the classrooms teaching indoctrination towards left-wing politics. And the evidence is that these kids got up and left. They did it during school hours. Nobody punished them for it. They felt entitled to do so. The administrators came out and gave excuses, called it free speech. We're using our free speech to express something that we feel passionate about. And the real unsaid elephant in the room is, how did the kids come to know those things? Do they have people showing episodes of Glenn Beck in schools and their history classes, showed them all sides of the political spectrum, or are they only seeing old speeches from Barack Obama and hearing the mantra from the Democrat Party about whoever's the latest and greatest, Joaquin Jeffries and Ocasio-Cortez? If that's their only reference, which is the only thing the teachers are giving them, no wonder the kids are out there protesting ICE, because they don't know any better. They know what we teach them. But the problem is, kids are always in a vulnerable state. That is a job that has to be taken very seriously, because parents might have something going on at home where they're trying to teach your kids values. That might be church on Sundays, and the kid doesn't want to go to church. The kid doesn't want to be grounded. The kid doesn't want to hear that he shouldn't say curse words in the house or anywhere for that matter. And then you've got a bunch of progressive teachers in the teachers union, untouched by any kind of oversight at all. School boards who are overly liberal for the most part. Managed to elect one pretty good for Lakota this time around. Need a bunch more. You can't just do it with one. But it's a start. But most of them are radical Democrats on way over the rainbow to the left. And their political spectrum is, they do consider people like Adolf Hitler and Mussolini to the right. But all those characters are to the left of the MAGA movement and to the movement of the people who went out and elected Trump, and the kind of Republicans that are in Butler County where Lakota is. And the kids are going to the Lakota schools from homes that are very conservative. They're being indoctrinated. They're being indoctrinated because that's the cost it is when you use the free babysitting service and you drop your kid off, and maybe you don't feel confident in your own parenting skills. So you drop your kid off, and this is what kind of education they get. And then they feel entitled to talk back and to go out and protest and to leave school and walk around with little signs screaming and protesting against ICE. And really seditious behavior and going up against law enforcement. This whole thing started with the communist infusion by starting the hippie movement, and the protests on campuses was started by the KGB in the late 50s and 60s. And it was a movement to cause seditious activity using free speech as the mechanism to trigger the action, and call it a free zone where you couldn't have any penalties because you hid it behind free speech. And these kids are out there now using it as youth. We have a free speech right to express ourselves. Well, how did you come to know what you knew? How did you come to understand those things? Were your teachers giving you all sides of the political spectrum or only one side? And we know the answer to it. They're only giving one side. Now, there's a lot of kids that weren't protesting. They have, they'll go through the whole school experience and they'll laugh about it 30 or 40 years from now, talk about how liberal the stupid teachers were, and it'll be a joke to them because they had good parents, they had grandparents, they had family structures that didn't seduce them into some faulty way of thinking. But as I looked at the kids who were protesting, I can tell you they all fall in some sort of psychological category of some kind of parental structure at home. And you can name them by name. You could list them off. And it'll make a lot of people feel bad because their parenting skills are not very good. And it shows in the kids. And the teachers, knowing it, fill the void with a bunch of radical leftist propaganda. And they turn them into zombies. They turn them into propaganda items of left-wing politics paid for by taxpayers to go out and advocate advocate things that the employees paid for by the taxpayers can't say themselves. So they convince the kids to do it for them. Just like they convince these kids to have sexual relationships with them. And it happens a lot more than anybody wants to think. A whole lot more. 2 or 3 times a year in almost every school, and Lakota being one of them, there's a story about something that gets out to the news. But most of them are being swept under the covers and no one ever gets them out. And the local media never goes deep and talks about them because they want to blow their sources. They like to do their 200-word articles and go back to sleep. They don't get into any hard reporting, so they don't say much about it. And they report only when someone takes it to the next step. And that usually means some student who regrets the relationship says something about it. But most cases, they never say anything. Most cases, nobody gets caught, and everybody moves on with their lives when it happens. And it's only important to say because that's a manipulation of the teacher-student relationship. It happens through sexual means that we know happen through prosecutions. But to a much less degree, the same thing is happening in political ideology. So if you can manipulate a student to have a sexual relationship with you, you can certainly convince them to vote for a Democrat. When they're vulnerable, they're mad at their parents, or they're having moments of indecision, or maybe the parents just aren't very good, and they haven't given the kids much structure to rest on. So to fill the empty void, there's some manipulative teacher that preaches left-wing politics, and you get a minority of people who show up and go protest ICE because the teachers can't do it, but they can convince the kids to do it. And then they try to make it sound like it was organic and hide behind free speech. And how could you go after the kids? They're your kids. They're concerned for members of their community who might be illegally here. And they need a path of citizenship. So they're protesting on their behalf. So progressive ideology gets infused into these kids because they're vulnerable in these classes. And these parents who send the kids there aren't doing a very good job at home of giving kids a foundation. And the kids end up empty vessels for some radical, loon, left-wing, crazy person that's mad at all things conservative and Republican. And they use the kids against the community. And that's exactly what I saw happening with the protests they did at Lakota, all the Lakota schools. And the media ate it up, advocated because they're left-wing as well. You don't get a job in media, and those kinds of media, unless you are a little bit left of center. They don't hire Trump supporters, people who advocate for people like Trump. They advocate for people who advocate for people like Obama and Jimmy Carter and Joaquin Jeffries and might support Ocasio-Cortez. That's all on the left. And Adolf Hitler would be more aligned with those kinds of people than he would Trump, that's for sure. And you have to have law enforcement. You can't break laws. And ICE is out there enforcing laws that we have on the books. Illegal immigration is illegal. And these kids aren't learning that in school. Instead, they're getting the progressive propaganda to overload. So Democrats can win only when they can radicalize the youth. And they use our taxpayer dollars in the classrooms we provide them to do it. And it's a sickening process. And we had to put it into it. And that's one of the reasons public schools have the brand recognition they have now. And that's why they're running into a funding problem, because people are sick of funding that kind of garbage, that kind of left-wing propaganda to go against what parents have been trying to teach their kids. And these schools try to radicalize the kids against their family structure and against their communities in devastating ways. And we got to put a stop to it. Slowly but surely, but it starts by talking about the reality of it, and the evidence that you see is definitely in that protest against ICE that was certainly pushed by the adults, and they hid behind the kids to be the mouthpieces that they didn't dare do themselves, because the ramifications would have been severe for them. So they hid behind kids. And there were kids that were willing to appease their teachers because the influence they have over their lives that they have abused. And it's a sickening relationship. A lot of changes to come there. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you.
Thank you for listening.